All right, students, welcome back. It's been been a week or two since we've done one of these, so welcome back. I hope you guys are all doing well and hanging in there. We have I know many of you guys are taking the full ACT sometime this weekend or perhaps the next weekend. So welcome and hope you guys are doing well with your preparation. Hopefully, we've been able to help you with some of the playlists that we've created. As we go through this, guys, we're going to talk about each section of the test. We'll talk about the scoring and how important it is to understand the scoring, and hopefully give you guys some final tips as you go into these last couple days of preparation. We'll talk a little bit about at the end of the video live stream about what to do on test day and how important that can be, yeah, so we'll get through that stuff. Sarah's online, guys. For anybody, Sarah is if you guys see Sarah, she's got the little wrench next to her name. Sarah is our teaching assistant for today. She is a perfect score on the perfect ACT score. Perfect ACT score. So welcome, Sarah. She's here to help answer any questions and also give somewhat of a personal opinion. It's only been a couple of years since she was in these programs. She's off to college. She's in college now, but yeah, she's going to be here and she helps along with our classes. So, yeah, guys, as you get into class today, if you haven't already commented, can everybody give me a thumbs up in the chat? Or if you don't want to give a thumbs up in the chat, just give a thumbs up below the video. And we'll get started here in just a second, guys. Okay. As always, we want you to make sure that you keep all of your questions related to the ACT. Of course, be respectful of everybody in the chat. I think there's only been one student we've ever had to block from watching these videos going forward, but of course we will do that if anybody gets disrespectful towards each other. We're all about positivity on these live streams, all about positivity, so make sure that you guys are staying as positive with each other as you can. You know, encourage each other as much as you can. This isn't going to be fun for any of you. I think we can all agree that this is not something that you guys love to do, right? Maybe you do, maybe some of you guys are... But ultimately, you like it because you get a score and it means something in your life. No, you know, testing yourself on 4 different sections in 3.5 hours is not something most of us like to do. Of course, the end result is really what we're shooting for. So it does take encouragement. It takes a team, right? Okay, the live stream, guys, will last for 2 hours today. And like I said, we'll go through each section of the test. We'll go through each... And then talk a lot about how important it is to be doing certain things that seem so minor, seem so elementary, but it's so important. Shafat, well, yeah, thanks for the comment there, guys. That's the one thing that I wanted to mention, or 2 things, I suppose. The first is, guys, if you haven't downloaded Star U yet, it's our tutoring app. All of the material within Star U is written by our current SAT and ACT tutors. So download Star U. Sarah, I would, if you're studying for your junior year, I see the one comment about studying for your junior year. Summer's a great time going into your junior year. Summer's a great time to start preparing or to think about this more and more because you don't have many responsibilities. So I think it's a great time to start preparing. I'm glad, guys. I'm really glad that you guys are liking the app, studying in the App Store or Google Play or Access. Hey guys, like I said, to download a student account on Star U is free. Most of the content on Star U is free. And then we do have some premium content for $5 a month. If anybody's interested, it's $5 a month for some premium content. We also have a subscription plan where you guys can go through a full course with me, 30-hour program. 20-hour program, 10 lessons. I take you through each section. Kind of what we're doing tonight in the 2 hours, but really it's more in-depth. It's like 10 times more in-depth because tonight we're going to spend 2 hours. And in the app we spend 20 hours. So if you guys are interested, I recommend taking a look at that. But at the very least, download the free version. I mean, we're trying to give you guys as many resources as we can for free that allow us to continue to do these videos. If you guys are interested, in joining our subscription, our membership program, you can click that join button below this video. That helps us, guys, make more videos. So if you have the means, we totally understand if you can't afford it. That's why we're going to continue to make these videos. But if you can, if you guys want to subscribe or join the membership program for $3 a month, you can click the button below this video. And joining that will only allow us to make more of these videos going forward. So again, help us spread the word. Subscribe if you can. Subscribe for sure if you haven't already because it's free. Join the membership if you have the means to do so. That's $3 a month and will help us to make more videos. So there's been a couple of you guys that have really helped out, and you're really helping everybody else out in that way. Because when you join the membership program, again, it just allows us to do more of these. So no pressure. I never want to make this about pressure, but it will allow us to do some stuff. Again, if nothing else, make sure you subscribe to the channel. That's all free. And make sure you download Star U and get 95% of the content that's covered on the ACT and the SAT. That's also free, and it's all written by our current SAT and ACT tutors. So I can't tell you how important that is. Okay? Okay. Yes. So guys, all these nice comments about Star U, I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you guys are working through it. It's particularly helpful on the English and math sections of both the ACT and the SAT. So again, if you're not taking advantage of those free resources, at some point it just comes down to hard work and accountability. That's where you guys can help each other. You guys can continue to encourage each other, and that you have a lot of great comments in these comments sections. So continue that. Don't forget about it, right? Don't forget about that positive encouragement. It will always help, and you guys will, I promise everybody will reach their goal scores. Okay, so hopefully everybody's ready to go. One final time, guys, can you give me 2 thumbs up in the chat, or just a thumbs up below the video if you're just joining us and you don't want to chat and you don't want to join the chat. But 2 thumbs up in the chat if you guys are ready to go. I posted, let me link this here. At the top of the page, I have pinned the message. We're going to be using the 74F. So many of you guys have probably already done this. Many of you guys have probably already done the 74F test. It's the one that's widely available. But in any case, I want you guys to be doing that. Give me 1 sec here, too. We got some more people that are looking to join. Okay, and then we'll switch over. Cool. Okay, guys, so if you guys open that document that's pinned at the top, if you get that message, if you guys open that document, you'll see something that looks like this. I've scrolled all the way down to the very bottom. This is where we always start these comprehensive reviews, and it's truly the most important thing. You can ask Sarah. What we're talking about in the first 25-30 minutes of this live stream, this review tonight, are going to be way more important than anything else we talk about in terms of individual sections. Okay, so one of the constant questions that we get asked, okay, so again, this is the 74F test. It's the official prepare for the ACT, whatever, 2021. This is the one that the ACT has released. It's the 74F test form. So I'm sure many of you guys have seen this before. Our intention is not to necessarily go over this in depth. We're not going to go over specific question types. We can maybe answer a few of those if many of you guys have the same question. But ultimately, we're talking about this in a much more broad sense on how you can improve, and just some positive thoughts about going into the test. Guys, in terms of which test you should take, the SAT or the ACT, it's kind of hard to get into on a personal, right, on an individual level, because it just depends on your preference. There's 80% crossover now between the 2 exams, so if you set your mind to one or the other, or you prefer one or the other, you really can't go wrong. But from advising beyond that, it really comes down to a lot of preference and individual, so it probably can't happen, but again, you can't go wrong, and hopefully that's encouraging more than anything. So if anybody that's out there and worried, right, about any aspect of that, just know that it's not going to be that big of a deal if you choose one over the other. Okay? All right, so let's get into this. So everybody should see this screen, right? 74F. And like I said, I posted in the message above, in the message at the very top of the chat, you guys can see that this is the 74F test. You guys can open that form and then scroll really close to the bottom. We're on page 60 here of that test form. Okay, page 60. And the most important thing that you can possibly understand, and this is, Sarah can confirm this. Like I said, Sarah, for those that are just joining us, is a perfect score on the ACT. I think she was 10 points short. I hate to break the bad news, Sarah, but I think she was 10 points short of a perfect score on the SAT. So she is exceptionally good at these tests, but the thing that she was the best at, maybe the best we've ever had in these programs, and why we have her on tonight and today and have her answering these questions, is because perhaps more than anything else, she really listened to what I'm about to say, despite us knowing going into this that she was going to do really well. Okay, there was no question that she was going to do exceptionally well. How well she was going to do was another question. And that's where she was, again, beyond belief in how well she listened to this. And it's particularly important because Sarah is an incredible test taker. So, for high level, for students that are looking to score 30 and above, I just want you guys to recognize this, that if you score a 30 on the ACT, if you score a 30 on the ACT, that's equivalent to the 95th percentile, right? So that's like getting an A on a test. If you get a 30, you get a 95% on your math final. That's a big deal. Most of us would be very encouraged by the idea of getting a 95%. So if you're in that boat, or if you're not, if you're looking to go from a 20 to a 25, what I'm about to say matters so much at every level of the test. And like I said, it's hard for high-level students to recognize that they aren't going to know everything. And the thing that Sarah was most impressive with is not her math ability, which is perhaps better than anybody we've ever had in the programs. Instead, it was her recollection that, hey, you know what? If I don't do perfectly on this, that's okay. I know I'm going to do really well. I don't want to overwhelm myself. And she really stuck to that goal. And coincidentally, when she took all of that pressure off of herself by not trying to be perfect, then she ends up getting the perfect score of a 36. And so it's so critical that we all think about it that way, because if we don't, we're going to be spinning our wheels, and it's just going to feel way too overwhelming. I'm sure some of you guys can give me a thumbs up if you want, but I'm sure some of you guys are sitting there feeling very overwhelmed about this test. That's natural. So what we need to do is we need to take a step back and recognize what it is we're trying to accomplish. And the first thing in doing so, and why this first 50, or like I said, 30 minutes of the review is the most important, is because this test is graded, I'm sure most of you know this already, but this test is graded on a 1 to 36 scale. Now ask yourselves, when was the last time that you were graded in anything on a 1 to 36 scale, right? You've never been graded on that. I can almost guarantee that none of you have been graded on a scale that looks like this before. And more importantly, you're probably never going to be graded on a scale that looks like that for the rest of your lives. So this is the one time when you're thinking about this, well, what is a 36? That, just like it seems, right, that doesn't mean anything. A 36 doesn't mean anything. Yes, we know that it's a great score. We know a 30 is a great score, but that's all relative. If I win the lottery, right, or you win the lottery, that's how you feel about that. Maybe you don't want to win the lottery, right? It's all, everybody's personal feelings or thoughts about what a 36 is all relative to that specific person. We have to put this in terms of something that all of you guys recognize, you understand, and that's to understand what this scale means. If you understand the scale of the ACT or the SAT, you are so far and away, light years ahead of everyone else taking this test. If you really understand this, and then you apply it. And again, the reason that we've had Sarah on, she's one of the best, if not the best person that's ever watched these videos, that's ever come through these programs in terms of being a natural test taker. So she had every reason not to listen to me. But instead of doing that, she was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Right? She was open to learning more despite already being such a strong test taker. And that's what all of you have to do. You can't go into this. That was my biggest asset when I took this as a kid, was that I never went in thinking I got to get it was just a means to an end. I was competitive. I wanted to be there. I wanted to do better than whoever the kid sitting next to me was. But it was never like this, if I don't get this score, then I don't get into this school and I'm a failure. I didn't think about the next day, let alone college. Now that laziness, that lack of thought into the future is not a good trait in pretty much anything that you guys will ever do, except for a test like this. Because then you're really narrowly concentrated on what your goal is and what you need to accomplish. So let's start out, guys, by understanding the score report. So you guys will see here on the top, these are the 4 sections of the ACT. For anybody that's taking the test on Saturday and watching this, I hope you guys know that those are the 4 sections. Yeah, and guys, this is all going to be, all of this is being recorded, so if you guys have any questions or want to come back and rewatch any of these lessons, it's all going to be recorded for free. So it'll be it'll be uploaded, or it'll be available for the recording immediately after we're done with this live stream. Yeah, so guys, if you guys, it's a great comment, and I appreciate the honesty about feeling anxiety, not allowing you to do your best. There's a reason for that. We all want to do well. We all want to get a 30, and I really truly believe that everybody can do it. We had a student a couple years ago who improved 13 points. Okay, and I'll just tell the story quickly to hopefully give you guys some more positive encouragement. Right, that's what we're all about going into this Saturday. 13 points she improved. It wasn't she started out at a 19 or a 20, either a 19 or a 20, and by the end of her preparation, which had very little to do with me, right? And me saying something, different than her. It was her embracing it. Like I told you for Sarah, who was already testing exceptionally well. This student, her name's Rachel. She's a data science major now, right? She would not have qualified herself as a exceptionally naturally great test taker. She had some anxiety. She didn't feel great about the test, but she didn't let that overwhelm her. And in doing so, over the course of a year, she just continued to work and learn new concepts and adapt and learn. And she went. It wasn't like she jumped from a 19 to a 32 or whatever it was, 13 points, 19 to 32 or 20 to 33. It was one of those. She went from like a 19 and then to a 24 and then to a 27. And instead of thinking about it as, oh, I'm not at my goal score yet, she kept thinking about it as, oh, is like I just improved 3 points in 2 weeks. That feels pretty good. And that inspired her to just keep going. And again, by the end of it, she improved 13 points. It's the most, in terms of test taking, it's the most remarkable thing I've ever seen in terms of that type of dedication and focus. Okay, so for anybody that's sitting there that's not already testing where you want to be testing, you have to continue to put in the work. Okay, you have to continue to put in the work. And you can't look at this as like, if I go from a 20 to a 23, most students think in their mind, well, I'm looking to get a 30 and I only got to a 23. Well, if you started at a 20 and you got to a 23 in 4 weeks in 1 month, and you put in 5 months of work, there's your 30, right? I mean, it's so easy if you think about it from that standpoint, but we get so into the test and what school am I going to go to and blah, 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 and how am I going to do that we don't think about it just from the most logical standpoint ever. Is if I improve 3 points in a month and I work at this for 5 months, theoretically I'll improve 15 points, right? And you might waver a little bit in that, but I can say completely honestly that this is a true statement. Okay, that somebody improved 13 points by just staying focused and staying positive, improving methodically rather than expecting some crazy score increase out of nowhere. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. Let's just say theoretically, I like to use, does that all make sense, guys, by the way? Is everybody feeling pretty good about this idea, about this positivity that we're trying to, if you go into this test positively and not worrying about all the bad things that could happen, and you start to think, let me look at this first question. Do I know how to do this? Yeah, I do. Let's go. Right? Does that all make sense? Okay, before we get into like the exact specifics. For anybody that's watched these videos before, what we just talked about in terms of the score and that positivity is all great. But how do we actually apply it, right? How do we apply it to the real test? Well, let me show you guys something. I'm going to use the score of an overall score of 28, right? We'll use the score of 28 as our example. But as we go through this applies at every level of the test. So what I'm about to tell you in regards to a 28, just because that's a great score, it's a great score. If you're scoring at 28, you're in the top 15% of all students. If you guys, some of you probably feel like 28 is, woe is me. I feel terrible with the 28, but that's actually in the top 15% of all students. So we like to use that as a great number to shoot for if you're not already there. But if you are already there and you're looking to score higher than that, this whole idea applies. You just bump up the number of questions, right? So let's look at a 28. Now again, when we sit there and think about like, oh, I'm such a bad math student, how could I ever get to a 28? That's a horrible thought to start the test. If you don't feel great about math, right? If you don't feel great, like you can't, there's no way I can ever learn math. Let me show you guys something that's particular. This is the most important thing you can go into Saturday with. Set a goal, right? Set a goal not based on the score, right? If 28 is your score, that's the one time and one time only that you should be thinking about that. Okay, so if 28 is your goal, you're not thinking about a 28. The moment that's gone, the moment that you have that number, you start to correspond that to actual questions. So let's take the math section because that's the one that most students can qualify themselves as a good or bad math student, right? We hear that all the time from students. Let's use that number. So instead of going in thinking, how in the world am I going to get a 28 on this test, right? Let's go in thinking, how many questions do I need to answer correctly to get a 28? I just told you guys that a 28 on this test is in the top 15%. Yet, a 45 out of 60 will get you a 28 on the math section, which is equivalent to a 75%. Right? If you took a school test and you got 45 out of 60, you'd get a 75%. You'd get what would be equivalent to a C instead of getting the equivalent of a B. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? So just to sit down, if you understand the scale and you're willing to go with me on this, right? You already get 10 percentage points just for sitting down. If you really think about it, you get a 10 percentage point bump from a school test just for sitting down. It's pretty crazy, right? So if we think about that, okay, if we think about a 45 out of 60 being a 28, 45 out of 60 is a 28, that's our gold number, right? For anybody that just said, I want to get a 28 on the math section, you don't go in thinking, how in the world am I going to get a 28? You go in thinking, how am I going to get 45 math questions right? And guess what? If I don't like 15 of the questions, I can just skip those. I mean, how incredible would that be if you took that test in school? If you took a math final and you're sitting there and you're like, I can just skip the 15 hardest questions and I still get a B on my math final. The reason that I did well on these tests when I was a kid was not because I was smarter than anybody else, or even because I worked harder than anybody else. In fact, it was the exact opposite. I did the minimum amount of work to get by and not to get grounded by my mom, who was a math teacher and just hated the idea that I was so lazy. But a lot of these things that she instilled in terms of how to take a test still resonate with me, like writing everything out, marking up the page as much as possible. But most importantly, when I was a kid, I would do everything in my power to figure out how many points I needed to get on the final to keep a B in the class, right? How do I keep a B minus and not go to a C plus and get grounded for the month, right? How do I keep my B minus in the class? And because of that, by doing that, I would have all the calculations worked out and would know that if I was sitting on a question that I didn't know how to do, I could skip it because that wasn't part of my calculation in terms of how many questions I needed to answer correctly. So when I got to a test like this, and why I've passed this along and recognized this right away, despite really nobody else teaching this, I've worked for a number of different companies over the years, and I just could not believe that this wasn't the first thing that we started with after I learned more about the test. This is the most critical thing that any of you could learn. If you understand this, it gives you all the motivation, all the incentive in the world to continue to get better. Okay? Does that all make sense? Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that idea makes sense? That instead of thinking about this as how do I get some score that I've never, that doesn't make any sense to me, instead, let's think about how many questions do I need to get right to get that score, because that's something that all of us do every single day in school for every test you've ever taken. And then just by and large, because you're taking the ACT, you get a 10% bump just because you sat down and wrote your name between what you see on a school test and what you see on the ACT. How incredible is that? For somebody like me who was lazy, who was always looking to do the minimum, right, to get by, this was the best news in the world. That I only, in order to get a 34 on the math test, I could skip the 5 hardest problems. That's like, a 34 on the math section is in the 99th percentile. Yet a 55 out of 60, right, 55 out of 60, if you just did the math on that, is like what, like 91.5, something like that, 91.5%. So there's the correlation. You get so many points just for sitting down, and you can just skip the 5 hardest questions. Or if you're looking to get a 28, you can just skip the 15 hardest questions. It's like the greatest news in the world for all of you if you adopt this and you really practice it and make sure that you can do it. Okay? Just for writing your name, look guys, if you don't believe me, okay, so just for writing your name, if you answer 0 questions correctly, you still get a 1. Right? So you're starting out with 1 point no matter what. And that's so to answer your question for just writing your name, you start out with a point, and there's your 10 percentage point bump. Right? Really, if you get 1 question right on any section, right now you're already at 4 points. So the math then starts to work out that just by sitting down, you're already starting ahead of the curve in terms of what you'd look at on a school test. And it applies at every level. We always ask students, and this is something that Sarah grasped onto right away, and Sarah can kind of comment, right? Sarah, we said right away that even if you're trying to get a 36 on the math section, we always ask students, okay, how many questions is the math test out of? And everybody says 60. But if you look at any recent ACT scale, there are 60 questions available, that's true, and most of us reconcile in our mind that 60 out of 60 is 100% because that's what we've always done in school. But in reality, over the last 5 years, a 59 and sometimes even a 58 on the math section, 58 out of 60 or 59 out of 60, in this case it's 59, will get you a perfect score. And in that case, and again, this is what Sarah recognized and was able to apply, that even at the highest levels of this test, if you think the math test is out of 60 questions, then you haven't looked at the score reports enough. Now you can look at them, or you can just trust me that I've looked at all of them for the last 5 years, and every single one of them in the last 5 years has had a scale that reflected a -1 curve. Maybe there's one that didn't, but let's just call it 98, 99% of the tests that have been administered, real tests that have been administered, like the 74F test, have had a -1 to get a perfect score. So even at the highest levels of this, whatever score you're going in with, you don't need to go in thinking, I have to get all 60 questions right. If you're an unbelievable math student, like Sarah was, if you're an exceptional math student, you can go in knowing that you can skip the single hardest question on the test and still get a perfect score. Varun, we'll get to it. So I know this is kind of in terms of the science section. In terms of individual sections, we're going to talk about each section after we're done with the score. But yeah, unfortunately, we'll do the science section at the very end of this video. Having said that, if you want to jump off and you just want to talk about the science section, this will be available as a recording. So as soon as we're done with this, then you'll have the whole video. You can just go towards the end, and you'll see that we're talking about the science section, and we'll answer questions like that one. But I'm just going to try to keep it so that we're going to talk about the score, guys, the scale. We'll briefly talk about the English section and Star U and how that can help you. Then math in a little bit more detail from what we're doing right now. Then reading, then science at the very end. And then we'll answer a few questions towards the end. Okay? So what I want everybody to do, and everybody can do this, this is not a content issue. You should all be writing down, and the 74F test form is a pretty good one to go off of. There's a little bit of fluctuation from one curve of one test form to the next one, but for the most part, it's pretty comparable. You know, you're maybe plus or minus 1 point from one test to the next one, but it's really comparable. So if you're looking to get a 28, right, or if you're looking to get a 28, then you set your goal score of how do I get 45 questions answered correctly. Can everybody give me 2 thumbs up if that makes sense, or a thumbs up if you don't want to join the chat. If you don't want to join the chat and you're just joining us, just give me a thumbs up below the video if that all makes sense. It's the single most important thing. And then I'm going to tell you guys a little trick, a little secret that for anybody that's watched our other videos knows how, if you've watched our Z04 video that we just did, I did all the questions in real time live on all the sections, trying to, as best as I could, to stay on the time and talk out loud. For anybody that watched that, you guys know how effective this next part is with this guessing technique. Okay? So the beauty of all of this, okay, is what type of test is the ACT? What, besides the fact that you already start with a 10 percentage point bump, right? We start with that. What other major advantage do we have on the ACT over what you would typically take in school? Renee, maybe, so to your question about the 2 sections being easy, 2 sections being hard, I think that's more of a student thing. You know, if the math section is hard, then most students think the math section is hard, but I don't buy into it too much. That it's, you know, that they intentionally make 2 sections hard and 2 sections easy. I don't buy into that too much. Usually it's the problem with like an echo chamber. Once one student says it was really hard, then every student thinks it was hard, even if that student got a 36 and they didn't really think it was hard. So that's, yeah, I wouldn't buy into it too much. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what you should be doing. Yeah, so the question about should I go into the test not thinking about the goal score? Absolutely, 1,000%. Thinking about which questions are going to get you to your goal number. If you're trying to get to a 28 on the math section, then your only thought going into the math test is this question going to be beneficial or not beneficial for me to answer? Do I really know this? And we'll talk more about how you can do that in more of like a systematic, task-oriented approach. Okay, but so important. Varun, we won't cover the essay, guys. Just for it's a good question. I always forget to bring it up, guys. The essay for the ACT, most colleges have said that they're no longer going to even look at the essay for the ACT, so, and the SAT has just done away with the essay entirely. Like you can't even take it on the SAT now. So I wouldn't worry too much about the essay. If you're an international student, that might differ. You'd want to look at the college requirements. International students sometimes will be required to do it. The essay might be required if you're an international student, only because they want a writing sample. You know, they want to make sure that you're not. So, yeah, just looking to that. Yeah, so Shafat, yeah, I was saying that. The scales are a little bit different, right? So from one test to the next, a 28, you know, a 45 out of 60 might get you to a 20, right, 27 or 29. but the point is that it's not that far off. Yeah, you might miss your goal score by 1 point, right? Or you might have a difficult test where you get to 45 and you get a 29. But for the most part, the scale is, it's plus or minus 1 point in any direction. So just I would recommend using the 74F test for the first 3 sections, and then we'll talk about science. Science is a really difficult scale, but the first 3 sections for this 74F test, you can use that as your goal marker, right? For whatever they say is this number, that's what I would use for my goal number. So guys, yeah, 28. So for anybody that's sitting there, right, thinking about how do I get a 28, you're not thinking about that anymore. Instead, you're saying to yourself, how do I get to 45 questions, and is this question going to benefit me in my quest to get to those 45? Okay? Does that all make sense, guys? Okay, but going back to my question earlier, what major advantage do we have on this test above all others? What major advantage do we have on this test above all others? Or I shouldn't say that. Above all others that you would typically take in school. What type of test is the ACT? What type of test is the ACT? That everything I just wrote out, right? You even have another built-in advantage. If you've watched our videos, and it's why we started Star Tutors in the first place, is because I got tired of listening to these different training programs for these different, right? When I started doing this and teaching this, I just got tired of listening to something that really didn't apply. Of course you can memorize all the math content in the world. That takes forever. And it doesn't deal with the anxiety, which is 50% of this test. 50% is anxiety and 50% is content knowledge. So if you can just start by overcoming all of the anxiety, then all of a sudden it makes it so much easier and so much more desirable to want to learn the content, because you're just going to keep building, right? From 45, okay, I memorized one more concept, now I'm at 46 on the math section. Now I'm at 47. It's very easy to go for that, right? Perfect, yeah. So Clutch and Varun, you guys nailed it, okay? You guys had said the 2 things. So everybody should write this down. The other built-in advantage to this test is that if you watch any of our videos, it's the thing I talk about the most, right? There's no penalty for guessing. No penalty for guessing. Every bubble should be filled in on the ACT. That's true of the SAT as well. Okay, Shafat, I'm glad we'll talk about the 3 pass on math and science tonight too, or today, for wherever you guys are in the world. Yeah, we'll talk about it today. So no penalty for guessing, and it's multiple choice. Okay, so I always use that example of, it's like the old infomercials. You guys are probably too young to remember these, but on these infomercials on TV, they used to be like, and there's more. They probably still do it like on late night segments or whatever. But and there's more. If you buy in the next 5 minutes, if you buy in the next 30 seconds, you get 2 for the price of 1, right? That's how this method, what I'm about to tell you guys, really feels in a lot of ways. Because while I told you guys to focus on this idea of 45 out of 60, there's another huge built-in advantage, okay? And that is that there is no penalty for guessing. You guys can see that we already did this in a previous review. Okay, so there's no penalty for guessing. And you have a multiple choice test. So if there's no penalty for guessing and you have a multiple choice test, one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen is the ACT, and that generally speaking, the answer choices, right, the answer columns on your bubble sheet, AF, BG, CH, are relatively evenly distributed, right? DJ, and what's the last one? EK, right? Okay, and so this is math only. They give you, only on the math, you have 5 answer choices. On the other one, there's 4. But on the math section, there's 60 total questions, right? There's 60 total questions. And there's 5 columns. So, theoretically, we would be expecting for each of these to have 12 of each. It is not perfectly distributed. So don't count up and figure that it's going to be 12 for each. It's not. But it's going to be it's going to be close enough for this guessing method to work. And for anybody that's seen our other videos, Shafat just mentioned our 3-pass method. This is so important, okay? Okay, so plus 12, it's not perfectly distributed. It might be like plus 10, right, plus 8, or not, it's not going to be 8. It's going to be like plus 10. Let's say this is plus 10. This one might be plus 14. Plus 9 and plus 15. I think that breaks up. right? But the point is that it's going to be close enough that if you start, so if you start, right, and you look at this, and this is very important, that if you look for the answer choice that you have used the least, right, on your bubble sheet, it's going to be pretty clear to see. You're going to have like A, F, and then B, G, okay? You use the same letter every time, guys. This is the most important thing. You do not want to select random letters. You have to stick to the idea that, yes, you are going to get more questions wrong than you're going to get right. But I guarantee, if you guys want to just talk mathematically, everything that we talk about in this video and in our programs is all based on mathematics. It's not based on some random, is my strategy better than yours? You can use a million different strategies on this test. But what we do better than anybody else, and I'm convinced of it now, is we take away the anxiety better than any other YouTube channel and any other teaching program that I've ever done, because we're basing it off the fact that all the programs that I was trained to do never mentioned these things. And that is such a disadvantage to students that don't see this. Okay, so if you look at this, a perfect example of this is the guessing. You have a 4 out of 5 chance of guessing every one of these questions. If you randomly guess, right, you haven't looked at the question, you're just filling in bubbles. 4 out of 5 of guessing each one of those wrong. Guessing wrong, right? 4 out of 5. Okay, if you do that for 10 questions, that means that's 4 to the 10th and 5 to the 10th power. Okay? Now, the chances of you guessing every one of these questions right is 1 out of 5. Guessing right? Guessing the correct answer. And we always get students that say, well, what happens if I guess every single one of the questions right? Statistically speaking, mathematically speaking, you are almost infinitely more likely to guess every one of the questions wrong than you are to get every single one of them right. Because this is 1 to the 10th over 5 to the 10th of guessing every one of them randomly right. So that would still be 1 over 5 to the 10th power of guessing even just 10 questions, all of them correctly. Think about how ridiculously low those odds are. Whereas if we just stick to this idea that these are relatively evenly distributed, right, the answer choices, and we look back at our bubble sheet and we say to ourselves, well, one of these answer columns has not been used very much. You can, if you have time, you can even count, right? If you have 10 questions left and you have 2 minutes to go and you don't want to do any more questions, you can count the one that's been used the least. Okay, it doesn't take very long. It takes a lot less time than you'd expect, and you should practice it just to give yourself your own confidence in this. But watch what happens here, guys. Okay, theoretically, let's say that you get 45 questions done, right? And we focus on the idea that on those 45 out of 60, right, you are 100% accurate. Because the idea behind this whole method, this 3 pass on the math and 3 pass on the science, is that if you get 45 out of 60, you're taking the time that you would have spent really frustrated and anxious on the 15 hard questions, wherever those are on the test, and you're applying that to make sure that the 45 questions that you do know how to do are answered with 100% accuracy. Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that makes sense? Now, we always get students that are like, well, what happens if I make a simple mistake? How can I be 100% accurate? And then we'll ask them, what's your goal score? And they'll say 34 on the math section. I'm like, you got to get so many questions right anyway to get a 34, right? So if you're worried about 100% accuracy on the 45 easier questions, we got a lot of issues, right, focusing on a 34 if you're worried about that. We are doing this intentionally, right? This is probably those 15 difficult questions would probably have taken you 20 minutes, and we're applying that 20 minutes to those 45 easy questions, right? The 40 or 45 easier questions. Now, the beauty of this, again, is and there's more. Watch what happens. If I look at these answer choices, right? If I look at these answer choices, and it will be more obvious than you think. You have to practice this on your bubble sheet. And let's see. I'm obviously going to be able to know which one it is because I can count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it would have been. So I think we can pick 2 answer choices here. I think you can either be It's either BG, right? You guys can see that there are 4 BGs here, right? Or 4 AFs, right? Same column. And if you get to a point where you're even, right, if you have like 9 and 9, then just choose one. Then it is a little bit of a random 50% chance of getting it right. But let's just say we would have bubbled in AF for the remaining answer choices, right? AF the rest of the way down. Yeah, we would have missed 11 questions, but we also would have gotten 4 more right. So if you get to 45 out of 60 and you properly use this 3-pass method and you guess on the last 15 questions, that's actually going to be an additional 4 points, 4 questions. And on a test like this, 4 points matters dramatically. Look what happens. If you get 45 right, you get a 30. How crazy is that? We said that that 49, right? 49 out of 60 on this math section is equal to a 30. That's crazy, right? 49 out of 60 is equal to a 30. And I just told you that you only had to answer 75% of these questions right and to practice this method to get a 30, which would be in the 93rd percentile for the math section. I'm sorry, 97th percentile. It's 95, 30 is a 95, 94% overall if the whole score is that. But for the math section, it's more like the 97th percentile at a 30. So if we're answering 75% of the questions, you end up getting a 30 on this test. And it will be very apparent. And if you don't believe me, let's look back. You're looking for the least used answer choice. If you look at this, right, let's see how many A's and F's we have here. Well, we have just one so far, all the way through that number of questions. A, F, right, A. Let's see. Look at that, guys. So through the first 45 questions, right, through the first 45 questions, A and F, right, A and F was used 7 times, I think. Let me just make sure that's right. I think that's right. Right, A and F was 7 times, and then lo and behold, we guessed. We answered 4 more, and on the entire test, it was used 11 times, and the perfect distribution would be used 12 times. So like I said, it's not perfect, but it's close enough that you can use this every single time, and it works brilliantly for the math and the science section, or math, reading, and science sections in particular. So guys, for anybody that's worried about the reading section, because we see a lot of comments, have you ever tried taking an untimed test? Can we all agree that part of the issue with the reading section is that we're worried about time almost all the way through it? We're not worried about what we're reading. We're kind of constantly thinking about the time. Can we all agree with that? Okay. Let me ask you this. Okay. Okay, let me ask you this. If you look at this reading section and you were to say, let's say you're looking to get a 30, okay, on the reading section. If you haven't taken an untimed test, I highly encourage you to take an untimed reading test and an untimed science test, and then to watch our corresponding videos for that section. Try it with the Z04 test, the Z04 test form. Okay? If we look at this, right, and I say instead of worrying about the time, I'm instead just worried about accuracy, 100% accuracy. And I use this same guessing technique. Let's say I get 30 out of 40 questions. And you want to talk about consistency. This might be something that you guys see all the time too. Has anybody taken a reading test and been very volatile in what your score is? Like you get a 32 and you're all excited, and the next time you get a 26 and you have no idea why? Part of that is because when you're skimming or you're not really reading to comprehend, when you're worried about the time, everything changes from one environment to the next. So we got to work on consistency. If you can prove to yourself that you can get 30 out of 40 questions, that's just 3 of the 4 passages. And you take all the time to do that. Okay? So if you do that all the way through, and then you guess, you find your guessing letter, just like we talked about on the math section. Let's see how many more questions we can pick up at the end here. We got 1, B, and G. So again, on this one, it wouldn't have mattered either. You could have picked between B, right? And if we count them up, it's going to be apparent. It's either B or G or D or J. And in just doing the first 30, okay, you would have picked up 3 additional questions. You would have gotten 33 out of 40 on this 74F test. Lo and behold, let's erase this for a second. Oops. What does a 33 correspond to? Well, geez, that looks pretty good to me. 33 out of 40. 31 on the reading test. By answering 75% of the questions, you get a 97%. Nobody believes this because honestly, the students that believe it, every single time their scores go up by 4 points overnight. If you haven't seen these videos before, your score will literally go up by 4 points overnight. Now, from there, once we remove the anxiety, as we talked about, removing anxiety and recognizing the formatting of this test can get you 4-point increase overnight. From there, it's obviously much more about hard work. I'd say 4 points is kind of the overnight increase. Okay? And then from there, again, you're not gonna. It's not gonna extrapolate. It's not exponential growth in terms of how much anxiety you can take away. At some point, you get to a point where you're like 10% anxiety, and that's a good thing. When you have a little bit of, if you're a little bit anxious, a little bit stressed, that's good because it means you're more focused. You want to do well. We just don't want that to be excessive. We don't want to go from 10% to 60% anxiety. If it's at 10, that's a pretty good number to be at. Okay. Nate, yeah, 28 is incredible. Shafat, again, I promise you guys that this stuff will work. This is all mathematically based. It is not me just guessing which strategy. Every strategy works different. I've worked with over like 1,200 students now at this point, and that doesn't even include the students that watch these videos, okay, and comment below these videos. But I personally worked with 1,200 students in the last 8 years through our classrooms, through our individual tutoring, all that kind of stuff. And I can, without a shadow of a doubt, guarantee that this works. This is mathematically based. I worked with a number of students before. It's probably been 4 years at Star Tutors, 3 or 4 years at Star Tutors, 4 years before that at different companies. And in every time I looked at this, it would work, which was why it was so mind-blowing that everybody wasn't teaching this. That the first thing that you guys should learn is about how this test is scored and how you can overcome that anxiety by setting reasonable goal scores. Okay? Shavad, I'm thrilled to hear that. Okay, so again, if you guys can implement these things, I just promise that your scores will go up. I guarantee it. It's a mathematical certainty. It's not me guessing that they'll go up. It is a mathematical certainty. If you guys want to watch this in action, and you're not scoring in that kind of the 30 range already for math, if you're trying to raise your score by, let's say by 3 or 4 points overnight, and you actually want to see this in action, I'll show you. Well, I'm going to post a video here that is me taking one of those real-time math tests, but I stop about 45 minutes in and at the goal number we set at the beginning of the video. Give me one sec here. And from there, we show how you can go from a 27 to a 30 overnight if you believe this and you really do focus on accuracy. So I encourage you guys to watch this before Saturday if you haven't already. Hey guys, so check out that video. I just posted it. If you guys want to check that video out, I highly encourage it. You're going to be, I'm not kidding, amazed, truly amazed at what this can do for you. Okay, truly, I promise, it'll be a huge, it's really, really important that we look through this, okay? Does that all make sense? Can everybody give me 2 thumbs up if you guys have your goal score for each section written down? Again, try to avoid the science section for 74F just because it's kind of a wacky science section. Go find a different scale and look for one that's more consistent. I would say that typically the science section, if you guys are wondering, for more recent tests, I'd say on average 39 out of 40, right, will get you a 36. And then from there, every question you miss goes down 1 ACT point. So 38 is, that's typically the average on more recent ACT science sections. If it's a really easy science section, then obviously simple mistakes will really hurt you. But yeah, can everybody just give me a thumbs up if this all makes sense, if you have your goal score written down for each one? Okay, and if you are ready to move on to talking about the individual sections. Okay. Shafat, yeah, Shafat. I know that you've been. I know you've been watching a lot of these videos from your comments and your live stream. So, guys, Shafat's a great example. somebody that has been on these, that has been regularly doing the work, has put in the time and the effort. We've seen, right, through these chats, we've seen it, and it's just going to lead to a score increase. Once you get over the anxiety, it's just about hard work, and it's very methodical. Like once you learn the punctuation rules, right, then you just learn them and you never forget them. That's why it's called a rule, right? It never changes. And that, again, that's so critical to recognize that and to figure out how, basically how to improve smarter, right, or how to work smarter, not harder, I think is the way that you say that. Smarter, not harder. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Let's keep going. Looks like everybody's ready to go here. Okay, so, oops, I said I didn't scroll up. Okay, guys, so we're going to start with the English section, and I'm just going to show you guys a few things related to Star U. The English section is the easiest of the 4 sections. If it's not today, it can be. This is 100% about hard work. I highly, highly encourage you guys to download Star U. Again, I'll post about that, but I'll show you how effective Star U can be, particularly for the English section. For the math section as well, it's just math has so many concepts. The English section, guys, only has like 12 total grammar concepts that it tests. And if you memorize it, we're not going to talk too much about strategy because there really isn't a strategy on the English section other than just to work hard outside of the test. And I'll show you what I mean by that and how important it is. So again, this is the time. Whoops, one thing here. Let's get Star U pulled up. Where it is so critical to. One sec here. This is the time where it is so critical to be putting in the time and the effort and the work. Okay. So guys, yeah, if you haven't downloaded Star U yet, I mentioned it at the very beginning. Okay, this is if you have, this is the home screen when you guys are students. So again, this is all free to download. Download Star U. Play. Okay, but in terms of these question types, right? If you go in and you put in the effort, and this is free to download, so this is why I don't really feel bad when students now tell me that they, you can track your results. You know how you do. If you click results down here, right, you can see how you've done on previous practice lessons. Okay, so if I click practice lessons, right, and I do ACT English, if I haven't done exceptionally well on a certain verb tense, I'm 0 out of 5. Right, so I got to go back and I got to memorize verb tense. So all I have to do in order to do that is go back to the home screen, right? I click lessons and practice problems on the home screen, ACT English. It does also prepare for the SAT, and for anybody that's looking for the PSAT National Merit, it also prepares you for the PSAT National Merit test as well. So SAT, right, is there. You click ACT. I'm going to click ACT English, and this is all free, right? If I click punctuation, which is the single most important section, you guys will learn about semicolon rules, right? So you scroll down here to the bottom, it says other punctuation, and it tells you the exact time when to use a semicolon as it applies specifically to the ACT. Okay? And now, lo and behold, I'm not making this stuff up, right? This is all stuff that we see on tests, and then we write these tutorials and put it on Star U for you guys to use. Lo and behold, when we do this, and now we come back, right, and we see this English test, if you've put in the time and the effort and you know the semicolon rule, the chances that the semicolon is going to appear on every ACT English section is 100%. Let's go find it, right? And if you know it, right, here's apostrophes. Do I know the apostrophes rules? Okay, do I know the difference between then and than? That's all on Star U. Okay, do I know apostrophe rules? Do I know, yeah, right here, guys, right? I've been doing this on the last comprehensive review. Okay, so if you know the semicolon rule, right, and you see a semicolon on the test, and you know that a semicolon for the ACT purposes only applies just like a period. You have to have a full sentence and then a semicolon for the ACT and then another full sentence, right? That's how a semicolon works on this test. if you just do that test, I see a semicolon in the answer choices. And now I go read, right? So here's number 26. I look at the comma, and I know the semicolon rule, but at a length of 22 feet, right? I read before where the semicolon would appear. This was where the semicolon would appear. But at a length of 22 feet, is that a full sentence? No. So immediately, the one answer choice that that students tend to miss, which is the semicolon answer choice, because everybody's just like, oh, I don't really remember that from 6th grade, so I guess it's the right answer, which is like the worst logic ever, right? Because you just didn't put in the time, and it's free to do it. Okay, if that's then again, that's where the accountability on yourself comes in, and that's why we want to encourage you, and that's why we want everybody to encourage each other. But at some point, it has to be about personal accountability if you want to improve. And if you do this and you use Star U in coordination with this, and if anybody hasn't used our advanced score reports yet, we also, if you plug in your answers to our advanced score reports on the website, you can actually be told the exact question types you're missing, right? Or if you wanted to do that $5 a month thing, you get a smart bubble sheet where you plug in your answers. Okay, so you plug in your answers, and then because of that, you get suggested practice. I'm not encouraging anybody to pay $5 a month if you guys don't want to, but if you guys go down here and you purchase this smart bubble sheet, right, you get lessons and practice problems, and then you submit your answers. So click here, right? Based on my previous practice tests that I've submitted, right, I have ACT math questions. Okay, based on the practice tests that I've submitted, these are real practice tests if you guys are interested. You can click Smart Bubble Sheet at the bottom. Do I have my test for the ACT? Yes, I do. And these are all real tests. So I plug in my answers to the 74F test, English, my 75 answers, whatever they are, and we have coded this on the backside to then tell you which question types you're missing. I think it's very, very well worth the $5 a month. If you could, I understand that not everybody has the means to do that, but $5 a month I think is well worth it, and you can get so much use out of that. It's so much better than purchasing a book, because for $5 a month you can go in here, you can plug in your answers for real practice ACT tests, and then it tells you exactly which question types from all sections, not just from one. It tells you the 15 lessons that you need to work on the most in order to improve. Okay? So I would recommend doing that, especially if you're a type of student that likes to take practice tests. If you like to take practice tests, there are 10 ACT practice tests. I would take one, then I would go review your suggested practice based on those practice tests, and then I would go take another test and submit those answers, and it will recalculate how much, right, the smart bubble sheet will recalculate which question types you've missed based on all of the questions on all tests, not just the first one. So you constantly are updated with that stuff. Okay? So I highly recommend you guys do it. There's just, if you bought a book, if you have the means to purchase a book, right, if you can afford to purchase a book, this is infinitely better. There's just no question in my mind after seeing this, what it became. After we've worked on it, Sarah has been an integral part of this, right? Sarah got a 36. She's helped with the smart bubble sheet and how we code this stuff on the back end. But if you can afford a $40 book, $5 a month for 8 months is $40, and it's infinitely worth it. I mean, again, that's just me personally saying that, but if you've watched our channel and you like these videos, I highly encourage you guys to do that, and it is particularly useful for the English section because it will tell you right away which question types you need to work on the most. Does that all make sense? Can everybody give me a thumbs up? That's really all I have for the English section. I know that was more about self-promotion or our company promotion than anything else, but I just can't tell you how important it is that if the smart bubble sheet tells you should be working on punctuation rules, then that's what you should work on. And I guarantee if you really read through that lesson chapter on punctuation and you do the practice problems, there's practice problems associated with every one of those lesson chapters. If you do those practice problems, the next time around on the next practice test you take, you won't miss that punctuation rule. It's working smarter, not harder. So instead of having to take 30 practice tests or 40 practice tests, now maybe you only have to take 5 because you know exactly which question types you're missing. Yeah, so guys, so the official ACT Red Book, right, the practice test guide book, that's all corresponding. We don't recommend taking, this is another thing just for you guys, there are enough ACT practice tests available on the internet, real ones. Don't buy a practice test guide from any company. We don't write any of our own practice tests intentionally. All of the ones that you find within that smart bubble sheet correspond to the ACT Red Book, right? If you guys see this, they all correspond to the ACT Red Book tests. as well as tests that have been officially released. So it's a great point, whoever made that point. So you guys can see here that a lot of these are corresponding. Okay, so ACT 2020 Red Book. Those are the real ACT tests. So if you can buy that and buy the Smart Bubble Sheet, those will all correspond, and you're plugging in your answers, and we've coded it all on the back end to correspond to that second test in the ACT Red Book. Okay, does that all make sense, guys? Can you guys give me a thumbs up? If, again, it's not promoting that you need to do this, but if you're interested, I think it's just well worth the $5 a month. And we've intentionally made it $5 a month so that everybody can continue to improve. Okay, we've intentionally made it affordable, hopefully for many of you. But I think it's infinitely better than working out of anything but the ACT Red Practice Test Guidebook, because those are the real tests. But just really important. It doesn't release tests like BO4, guys, but we've thought about releasing it ourselves because I think it's frankly, it's absolute crap that they don't release all the tests. As a tutor, right, in terms of like the unfairness of all this, and that's why we try to create these videos, we've been going back and forth on whether or not we legally can post these. But as a tutor or any individual private tutor, you have access to these tests, and then you can give it out to everybody. So it seems very, very unfair if you don't have access to these tests. Now, I will say that there are a number of places on the internet where you can find these tests. So don't let just like Crack ACT if you haven't used that. So you can search for it, but it's really important, right, that you do find these real practice tests and don't use a third party. We intentionally do not write these tests, although we could, so that we're not doing anything outside of what the real ACT tests look like. And again, like I said, there's enough material out there that you can find these pretty easily. So all that being said, guys, this is so much about hard work for the English section. It's about memorizing your grammar rules. I think the Smart Bubble Sheet will just make this more efficient. But if you don't want to use that and you just want to do each individual lesson on Star U, that will help tremendously as well. So the English section is all about hard work. And kind of a final point here before we go into the other three sections. Guys, if you take the time and you memorize every grammar rule, okay, I said that there were really just 12 grammar rules that needed to be memorized for the ACT. Now, that might take you 2 hours to memorize each one. That's 24 hours. That's a long time. But if you do it, there are 12 and really only 12 grammar rules, which is why this test becomes so easy, this section. Because if you think about it, to give you more motivation and incentive to actually memorize these rules, think about this, guys. If there are 50 grammar questions on this test, and there are, on the English section, there's 75 total questions. Okay, there are 50 grammar questions. And if you take the time to memorize them, and these are easy enough rules that you can memorize some of them before Saturday if you're taking the test on Saturday. There are 75 questions, and per English question, you get 36 seconds on average. Okay, now the ones that ask you about the main idea or where should this sentence be placed, those ones are always going to take you longer, right, theoretically. But if you have 36 seconds per question, and you have all 50 of those grammar rules memorized, how long would you guess it takes you to answer one of those grammar questions? Like that semicolon question would have taken probably 15 seconds to answer. Does that make sense? Can you guys see that? It's probably, let's call it 15 or even 20 seconds. If I have 36 seconds per section but I put in the hard work to memorize every one of the 50 grammar questions that could be found on this test, right? There's 12 grammar rules, but you can do different comma rules, right? You can do different things with those. If you have 50 grammar rules and you do all 50 of those questions in 20 seconds instead of 36 seconds, right? That puts you at 1,000 seconds, which is it's about 17 minutes. Okay, so you have 17 minutes if you choose to memorize these grammar rules. The whole test is 45 minutes, meaning that if you take 17 minutes, you have 28 minutes to really thoroughly read the 25 remaining main idea and organization questions. 28 minutes for 25 questions. Simply by putting in the time and the effort and the hard work outside of the test will allow you to, everybody should score 30 or better on the English section of the ACT. I'm convinced of it because of just this simple math idea that if you memorize all the rules, you have so much time for those main idea and organization questions to actually go back and reread those. Does that make sense, guys? Any further questions about the English section, or can we move on to the math section? Can everybody say good to go, or give me a thumbs up in the chat if you guys are good to move on to the math section? If you're not, let me know, and we can keep working through this stuff. Okay, great. Yeah, Shafat, go ahead. If you guys have any questions, let us know, and then we're moving on. But transition word questions, yeah, if you guys have transition word, there is a good way to go about transition word questions. We'll just go through those really quickly. Those are harder questions. Good one to talk about. Find a good one. This is how you should approach transition questions, guys. If I can find one. I don't like that however one. Let's see if we can find a better one. Look at that, there's another semicolon right away. If we know it, if we know the dash rule, those questions become so easy. Okay, so yeah, no, that's not good. Come on, where's a good one? Okay, yeah, so this isn't a bad one, number 55 on the 74F test. Yes, good question. So Shafat, yes. If you have a period and a semicolon in the same place, right? Because like we said that if you read the Star U punctuation lesson chapter, a period and a semicolon mean the same thing as it applies to the ACT. So those are equal. So if you see those in the exact same place, they're immediately both wrong. You don't even have to read it. If you see a period and a semicolon in the same place, and I guarantee you see one of those on Saturday, it happens all the time on this test. I guarantee you see it. If you see that situation where you have a period and a semicolon in the same spot, you can immediately mark off both answer choices because they can't both be right because you can only choose one answer, and so they're both wrong. Yeah, I would just, so anytime you have a dependent clause, right, make sure you read before and after the punctuation mark and just see up until that punctuation mark, can the sentence stand on its own? If you put a period there, would the first part make sense? Would the second part make sense? That's how generally you want to make sure that you can determine an independent versus dependent. And yeah, an independent clause is just a complete sentence. Okay? Regarding transition questions, guys, the way that I like to teach transition questions is to eliminate the transition words for the time being and read the first part and then the second part. So in this case, we probably have to go back to the beginning to make sure that we understand these transition questions. Transition questions, though, are part of that 25. Those are not grammar-related questions. So again, if you have time to go back and reread, transition questions can be somewhat easy. It's just about making sure you're taking the necessary steps to get those right, and more importantly, making sure that you memorize your grammar rules so that when you come across a transition question, you actually have time to do it. Okay? So it says, to conduct all this research, staff are on site year-round. Observers who work several 12-hour shifts over the course of a week. Okay, so that's not a full sentence, right? So we have to take that out. Observers work several 12 hours. So the answer must be H for 54, because that's not a full sentence. We don't have a verb if we use the word who or a comma with working. So it's H. Observers work several 12-hour shifts over the course of a week. To change personnel in the winter, crews ascend the mountain in a vehicle gripping the snow using revolving tracks similar to those on a military tank. So how do those sentences relate? And better yet, do we need a transition word there? So does that make sense? If I read this without the transition word and I determine, man, that sentence makes sense, why would I add something? Then you don't need to add anything. Does that make sense? So I don't think I need to add anything. I don't think there's a necessity to use a transition word. And if you see that on the test, remember that the simplest answer choice, the ACT English section tries to be as simple as possible. So stick with the simple answer choice. Yeah, you're right, exactly, right? So the ones with the most commas, that's exactly right. They're typically wrong because they try to keep it simple, and more punctuation means more complication, right? So you're getting a sentence more complicated, so it's not typically correct. The simplest answer choice. Does that all make sense? Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that idea makes sense? And again, guys, to all your questions about all of this stuff, I cannot reiterate enough that all of these lesson chapters, transition words, punctuation, dependent and independent clauses, they all show up directly in Star U. If you don't believe me, very quickly, look what happens, right? We come back here. So we had questions about how to identify independent and dependent clauses. Well, if I click on lessons and practice problems, ACT English, again, this is all free. This is all the free component of it. Lo and behold, we talk all about separating modifying phrases from independent clauses. Talking about independent and dependent clauses. This is all right there. So what are sentence building blocks? Sean, not necessarily with the comma and the dash. And while we don't have enough time probably to talk about it tonight, it's all right here. The comma right is here. And if you just put in the time and the effort, right, here's the whole thing about long dashes right there, or M dashes as they're sometimes called. And it tells you exactly when to use a long dash. This, again, is not me trying to promote this too heavily, but I just, in some ways, we should be promoting this because I just truly believe that it's the best stuff on the market because it's all written and edited by current tutors. And it's all mathematically based. It's how do you guys truly improve, right? Reduce the anxiety, get better at this stuff in the shortest amount of time because I realized I was 18 not that long ago, 17, 16, whatever you guys are. It's not fun to look at grammar rules all day. That stinks. There's a million other things you'd rather be doing. So how can we most efficiently do it? Through the smart bubble sheet or just doing these lessons on your own, you can improve significantly from one test to the next. Okay? So let's jump into the math section, guys, because we do have to stop right at the top of this hour. We're gonna keep it right at 2 hours. Okay? And the math section is also a good one to use for Star U, but because it's rules-based, the rules-based sections of the ACT and the SAT really lend themselves well to just memorizing more content. But for the math section and then for the science section as well, there are some strategies that we need to learn, right? We need to use. And that's particularly true of the math section because, frankly, there are a lot of concepts that you need to know on the math section in order to get 60 out of 60. But we already talked about this. You don't need to get 60 out of 60 in order to even get a perfect score. So there is no reason to be thinking about this in terms of 60 out of 60. We should be thinking about it in terms of 59 out of 60. Okay, and the easiest way to do that is to systematically go through this and approach this in a way that we're familiar with in terms of which questions are the easiest. So if I look at this 74F math test, right? We talk a lot during our video lessons or doing all this stuff, we talk a lot about the 3-pass method, right? This 3-pass method idea. Okay, and categorically, mathematically, we had some pushback from a few students a couple years ago as to whether or not this would work. If you really want to improve your score, this is the only way to take the math section. It's not necessarily, which questions. I'm not telling you which questions to answer because that's different for everybody. But when you have a test where every question is worth the same value, this is not just me saying this, which so many programs out there do. This is a mathematical certainty that if you find the 45 easiest questions for you and you alone, and that's different for every student typically, if you find those 45 questions, you're going to get the same. So nobody ever asks students, well, you got a 36 on the test, or you got 33 on the math section, but did you answer any of the hard questions? It's like, who's ever asked that? Nobody ever. That should not be our goal, right? It should be to find how many questions. If I'm looking to get a 33, how many questions do I need to answer in order to get that number of questions correct that corresponds to a 33? So yeah, to answer your questions in terms of this 3-pass method, right? It's objective. It is objectively speaking the best way to approach this because it is all mathematical. On the first pass, we are trying to find, right? Think about it this way. When you go into this, in terms of reducing your anxiety, you have just completed on the real test 75 grammar questions, 75 English questions in 45 minutes. Your mind is not thinking about math, and it's especially not thinking about math if the English section didn't go well. Like if you're like, oh, I was expecting to get a 36 on English, and that was the hardest English section I've ever seen. Well, that's not good. It's hard to avoid that thought. But so if that thought happens, it just is what it is. But we have to find a way to overcome that anxious, that stressed thought. Okay? Yeah, and so it does take some practice, right, Renee? It does take some practice in terms of going back and finding the ones you skipped. You do have to practice this idea of being calm, knowing that is a time consumer, but we're taking that 15 extra, 20 extra minutes that we miss on the other questions in order to try to apply it so that we go through it, right? That we go through and find the ones we missed. Okay? Does that make sense? So on the first pass, we are finding the 10 easiest questions on this test. Okay? And what I mean by easiest is that a word problem is never going to be considered the easiest question on the test. It just won't. Because you don't know what the word problem is going to immediately say, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. But 10 easiest, no word problems. Okay? No word problems. These are the things that I would recommend doing, writing down and then practicing this. You can do it on Saturday. It's not that hard to learn. No, yeah, Renee, it won't get affected if you circle the question numbers on your bubble sheet. You might want to try to erase it just so there is no confusion for sure. But if you lightly circle the ones on your bubble sheet, then it won't affect it. And I recommend doing it. That's how I do it typically. If I have a bubble sheet, is I'll just lightly circle it, right, so that I know that I've skipped that one, and then I'm moving on to the next one. So it's also a good way to keep track of where you are, so that you don't accidentally bubble in the wrong answer. You circle it instead of bubbling something in, and then you can come back to it. Okay, so no word problems and 100% accuracy. And that's the most important thing, because regardless of how we're taking this test, if you don't use this strategy, okay, you still have to be accurate on the 10 easiest questions. I mean, that's a given. Regardless of when you encounter those questions, you would still need to get all of those questions answered correctly. So we have to be 100% accurate. And what I like for our students to do is I actually have everybody keep a tally of those 10. So you're task oriented, right? You're actually tallying out 10 questions, wherever it may be, on a scratch sheet or at the top of the front page. You tally out 10 questions so you know exactly where you are, and you're staying task-oriented. You're thinking about this past method and the next question you need to answer, rather than thinking about timing, right? Or what's my time? All that kind of stuff that goes into it. Does that make sense, guys? Once. Okay. So let me show you what I mean by this, right? Let me show you what I mean by this. If I'm looking at this sheet and I've just completed 75 English questions, there is no way that it's going to feel good to start by answering question number 1. Right? So maybe you have to skip 5 questions. Or maybe you skip 4 of the first 10. I am not disputing that these questions aren't going to be easy at some point. But it's so likely to make a simple mistake. I can't tell you how often we see students in their score reports where they miss 4 of the first 10 questions on one section. Most of the time that has nothing to do with the content. There's not 4 hard ones out of 10 typically, right? Math is a little bit different because it is, from 1 to 20, 21 to 40. Then it might be an order of difficulty if you want to think about it that way. But it's not, every individual question is not easier or harder than the last one, okay? So if we think about it that way, and I know my rules, questions 4, 5, and 7 here, 3, 4, and 7, can everybody give me a thumbs up that you guys see how much easier 3, 4, and 7 are going to be in terms of the amount of calculation, or the amount of time that it's going to take you to understand this. Now, maybe you don't know how to do question number 3, or that overwhelms you. Then just skip it. Then you skip that one too. But if you know how to do this one, and the bases of the exponents are the same, it's just 2x plus 7 equals 15. Right? And that's where the practice comes in. But think about how easy that question is to do. 2x equals 8, x equals 4. If I have a minute per question, that probably took me 15 seconds. And I'm moving on. Okay? Let the function f be defined as this. What is the function of f of 3? Well, anytime I see f of 3, I know that that's saying x equals 3, so what is y? Right? That's the notation. If I know that notation, how easy is this question? I write everything out. That's what my mom taught me to do as a math teacher, right? Minus 7 times 4 times 3. Write everything out. Don't make a simple mistake just because you're too proud to write things out and you think you can do it in your head. Nobody cares about that, right? Nobody ever asks anybody else, well, did you do all the questions in your head? You got a 36, but you had to write everything out. Like, nobody ever asks Sarah that. I guarantee it. Right? Everybody's always like, oh my God, you got a 30. That's unbelievable. This person must be so smart. Right? Nobody's asking how you did it, so don't make simple mistakes on questions that we know how to do. Now it's just 5 times 9 minus 7 times 12 plus 3 is 15. You can do that one in your head, I think. Okay, 7 times 15 is a 105, I think, so minus 105. All right? I think so. Yeah. And then this is 45. 45 minus 105 is negative 60. If I was just doing that on my own, that question again would have probably taken 20 seconds, 25 seconds to do. And I get a minute. So every time you're doing these easy questions, you're adding more time to the time that you spend on the other questions, the harder questions. And you're never losing momentum. Yeah, so questions with figures and graphs, like angle questions, right? Those are always easier. because I know that the ACT figures are generally drawn to scale. So if this looks like 40, this is probably 42. In this case, they give it to us because it's a parallelogram. That, yeah, it's confirmed that this one by rule is also 40. But you can make some of those assumptions based on figures and tables. So those ones typically tend to be a little bit easier to see. And then I know 40 plus 57 is 97. They're asking for CAD, which is down here. 180 minus 97 is equal to 83. And I have my calculator for all of these if I need it. But now the answer is D. Yeah, Renee. Yeah, absolutely. So if you guys are really good with your calculators, you can do these questions in a million different ways. The whole point is that you're just looking for the easiest 10 questions that don't give you any thought. You just look at it and you're like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. You can read through the questions. I've seen this test before. Right? We did a real-time video on this. Okay? So that's very, very, very critical. Number 8, right? Looking at number 8, when x is 1/2. How easy is that question? X is 1/2. So now I'm just going to go plug it back in here. I'm going to rewrite. I like to rewrite what the question states. Just helps me get started with it. I get 8 times 1/2 minus 3 over 1/2. I have my calculator the whole time. 4 minus 3 is 1 over 1/2. This is a common mistake that then everybody goes with 1/2. 1 divided by 1/2, if you need to plug that into your calculator, do it, is actually equal to 2. Guys, technically speaking, you don't need a calculator for any section of this test. In fact, if you guys are... Number 7, guys, this is a triangles question. If you guys are looking in the Star U app, it's under area and perimeter, or angles. It's either under area, perimeter, or angles if you're looking at Star U. A couple of years ago, we were filming one of those real-time videos that we do, and I had forgotten my calculator. So if anybody's worried, instead of doing it with like a little, like whatever, calculator that you'd see at home or doing it on my phone, we demonstrated what it would be like to have your calculator suddenly run out of batteries. So we actually took a test, ACT BO4 math test in real time. Okay, so this is the video for that if you guys are interested. But the point of that was not to show you guys that I knew my math so well. In fact, I knew that my score was not going to be as good because there are questions, as we all know, it's helpful to use your calculator. But the ACT technically states that you don't need a calculator for any question on this test. Is it helpful? Does it help with timing? Absolutely. Can you confirm your answers 100%? But we did that video to say if the worst possible scenario happened. Everybody's always like, well, what happens if I get a 32, but I've been practice testing at a 28? It's like, yeah, well, if I win the lottery, that's great too. Right? But you want to set expectations so that you're not thinking about a 32 when your practice tests have been at a 28. Set the expectation as how do I get a 28 on the real thing? Because that's what matters. And if I've done it on a practice test, that doesn't mean I've done it on the real thing. And by setting then your expectations at a 30 or a 32, that it's just going to happen, if it does happen, great. That's icing on the cake. That's awesome if it happens. I'm not disputing that would be great. But if you go in with the mindset, think about how much anxiety that puts on you. If I've been practice testing at a 28, and then all of a sudden I get off to a bad start on the math, I'm like, wow, this is a lot harder, and my mind is thinking about a 30, that doesn't help us. Instead of thinking, I want to get a 28, which is 45 questions, let me find those 45, and I'm sticking to those 45 until I'm done with those, and then if I have 5 minutes left, then I can consider doing something else and adding a few more to that 45. But until you've done that, it's just so critical. Okay, does that make sense? That is just so important. Can everybody give me 2 thumbs up if that idea makes sense? That BO4 calculator video is one of the best we've ever done, and it's one of the best. In fact, the whole BO4 section, testing video section, if you guys are interested, the BO4 testing videos, for whatever reason, are some of our best videos we've ever filmed. I highly recommend you guys to check those ones out because they talk a lot about this, and like the no calculator idea is super important because it shows you that on your worst day, did I know I wasn't going to score as well as I could without a calculator? Absolutely. Did I let that affect me? No. Instead of letting it affect me, if I was looking typically to get 57 or 58 questions done, without my calculator, I thought maybe I can get 53 done. Is that the best score I can do? No, but most students, when their calculator runs out of batteries, lose it, right? We've had students cry, seriously, and that's not a knock against them. It's more me not teaching it well enough, which is why we did that video, which is why we talk about it now. I've learned as a teacher how students react, because I've worked with enough of them at this point to kind of see everything. So if your calculator runs out of battery, don't let that affect you. Just know that, hey, this is something that I have to deal with. But then I got to make sure I don't lose focus when I get to the reading and science sections. If my score goes down a little bit, if your math score goes down 4 points, you've only lost 1 point on the overall ACT score. So why in the world would I let my calculator affect the reading and the science sections afterwards, or better yet, letting me do as well as I can without a calculator on the test? Yeah, and the computer-based test, actually, in some ways, these strategies that we're talking about work even better for the computer-based test. So anybody taking the computer-based test, namely the fact that you can click on each individual questions on a computer-based test, you know which ones you've answered. So it's a lot easier to actually jump around on the computer-based test. So we get questions all the time like, will this work on the computer? If you're an international student or if you're taking the computer-based test in the US, it actually works better in some ways. You just have to practice it or get familiar with the format for it. International tests tend to be the same. Yeah, guys, it's all one test. Usually the international tests are previous domestic US tests that weren't released, so that students haven't seen before. So like the Z15 test, if you guys have taken that, that was actually a US-based test from like 2016, and then it became the 2019 April International test, but nobody had seen it in 2016. It was one that they didn't release, so nobody knew about it other than the students who had taken it and kind of remembered, but that didn't help. I mean, that's not going to help you that much. Okay, does that all make sense? So again, we're looking for the 10 easiest questions on pass number 1. Okay, after pass number 1, we get to, you guessed it, pass number 2. Okay, pass number 2 is when we have our goal score in mind. So earlier we said 28. So pass 1, everyone should be at the same point on pass 1, regardless of how much time it takes you. On pass 2, we have our goal number of questions in mind. A 28 corresponded to 45 questions. So I know on pass 2, I have to get 35 out of 35 questions answered correctly. And there's my 45. Does that all make sense? Can everybody give me a thumbs up? There's 45 out of 60. And then, of course, if we properly do that and get 100% accuracy on those 45, our guessing technique, which is pass number 3, where we find the least used answer choice, on pass number 3, right, we're probably likely with 1 minute to go, we move on to pass number 3 with 1 minute left on the clock. We find our guessing letter on our bubble sheet. If you want to take a little bit more time to make sure that you get your guessing letter, maybe you leave yourself 2 minutes at the end, you'll probably pick up another 3 to 4 questions. If you get to 15, you're looking at a 28. And the 28 suddenly becomes a 30 if you properly use this and you properly practice it. Shafat has been commenting very nicely in the comments section for the last hour or so that it's worked extremely well. And I promise you that everything we talk about here is based on mathematics. It's not based on an objective, right? It's based on objective strategies, not just something I'm making up off the top of my head. This is all based on the actual ACT scale and score, and all of you guys can continue to improve if you have this thought of 3-pass method, 45 questions. How do I find those, and how do I systematically go from 10 questions? Okay, I got 10 done, boom, those are 10 for 10. Now, whatever time I have left, I have to go find 35 additional questions that I need to answer. If you guys can believe it, for students that are getting a 28, typically these first 10 tend to take about 9 minutes, right? Because those are easier questions, so you're a little bit ahead of pace. Which means that on pass number 2, you would then have 51 minutes, right? 51 minutes to answer, or 50 minutes, right? 50 minutes to leave ourselves a minute at the end. 50 minutes for these remaining 35 questions. We're so far over time, and that gets us to a 28. Yeah, so the second pass, guys, is just based on the number of questions in our goal score. So everybody knows they're at 10 out of 10 after the first pass. That's universal no matter what your goal score is. On pass number 2, we set the expectation for ourselves that if you want to get to a 28, that corresponds to 45 out of 60 questions. So pass number 2 is finding the remaining 35 questions that we know how to answer with the remaining time left on the clock minus the 1 minute. Does that make sense? So you're just finding whatever your goal score is, and you're going back to the beginning, right? So on pass number 2, I got 10 out of 10, and I know that I skipped number 1. So now I go back to the beginning, and guess what? The beauty of this is you get 10 questions right, and then you get to go back to the beginning. I don't think this question is going to be particularly difficult, so I get an easy question to come back to after I've warmed up with 10 even easier questions. Does that make sense? So after pass number 1, you get your 10 done, you tally up 10 questions, then you go back to the beginning and you start over as if you're taking the test for, right? And you're finding the number of questions that you need to answer. knowing that if you're trying to get to a 28, really a 28 becomes a 30. If you're trying to get to a 30, you probably only have to answer 35 additional questions, and you have 50 minutes to do so. It's a strategy that will work every time. If you try it and it doesn't immediately work, you got to practice it because it's a different way to take a test than anything you've done in school before. This is not how you typically take a school test because most school tests are not multiple choice or they're not entirely multiple choice. By the way, if anybody's interested, this whole strategy works on the multiple choice section of the AP exams too. So just something to consider. AP exams are graded on the same scale. Right, a certain number of students get a 5, a certain number of students get a 4, so on and so forth. Does that make sense, guys? Can everybody give me a thumbs up if this all makes sense? Okay, thumbs up, guys, if this all makes sense. Sorry, I'm just having to stand up because it's hard to sit. I don't envy you guys getting. I don't envy students getting older or having to sit there for 3.5 hours. I know how stressful that can be. Yeah, this also works on the SAT as well. Yeah, so Renee, you weren't allowed to move back and forth this year because they were computer-based, all for everybody. But in typical years, you are allowed to go back. But yeah, this year you weren't allowed to go back, so we actually filmed a video for that. But you're right, Renee, yeah, in typical years you are. Like this coming year, you'll be able to go back again to previous questions. But because they had students taking the test at home this year, that's why you couldn't go back. But moving forward, for anybody taking an AP test, it will be different. You'll be able to go back. Typically, it's just a paper test like these SAT and ACT tests are. If you're an international student, that might change a bit. I'm not exactly sure of the AP international rules. But yeah, for US-based students this year, it will change. It will go back to how it used to be before the COVID stuff. Okay, so let's keep going, guys. Let's talk about the reading section. Reading is the one section that's a little bit more up. You guys can see that we were going through this, right? Like as an example, real quick, I just have to mention this because this is a perfect example of why this method works so well. At number 55, question number 55, if you've taken Algebra 2 before and you've studied period, right, the period graph of a function, sorry, the sine and cosine graphs of a function, okay? I just want to, what am I doing here, jeez? Sometimes I baffle myself with some stupidity. I don't know what I'm doing. Just clicking around and I could just delete it all at one time. Okay, yeah, I'm an idiot. Okay, let's look at this, right? If you studied this, can everybody, and this might not be everyone here, right? But if you know the period of a function, for somebody that studied this, right, f of x is equal to cosecant 4x. And we know that the cosecant graph, right, is on the same plane as the sine graph. Okay, and if they're looking for the period of the function, we're doing the exact same thing for the cosecant graph as we would for the sine graph, which is just to say that this would be bx, right? Whatever is in front of the x is the b variable. When we think about the sine and cosine graphs, this might not make sense to some of you who haven't studied this in school yet or haven't reviewed this. But if you have reviewed this, does everybody see that this would be bx? And we know that the period of a function, right, period is equal to 2 pi over b. B in this case is equal to 4. So 2 pi over 4 is just equal to pi over 2. And that's the answer. And the reason this method works so excessively well, it really does, it's just so objective. Does everybody see that if you knew the rule of the period of a function, number 55 is easier than question number 1, guaranteed, if you know that rule. Now, if you don't, it's obviously not easier because you don't know the rule, and it's going to be a guess anyway. But if you know the period of a function for cosecant and sine graphs, right, that question is going to take you 10 seconds to answer. Does everybody see that? For a thumbs up if you see that. And again, it's going to vary. If you haven't done that, there's probably questions on here that you find easier than I would find. But for certain questions, if you've studied it before, this question is going to be so straightforward. Yeah, exactly, Renee. Yeah, for the tangent function, it's just pi over b for tangent and cotangent. So does everybody see that? If you've studied these things before, that question 55 is so much easier than question number 1. And it might not just be 55. Right, you could do this on a number of different questions, I'm sure, throughout the test. But the point is that you can't get stuck on question number 17. That's a word problem that doesn't make sense at the time, just because, right? Just because because it's number 17 and you think it's supposed to be easy. It might not be easy on that day, or you might have your brain might just go to mush for a second. So you got to keep moving so that you can see a question like 55. Cosine functions are also 2 pi over b. Same with secant functions. Sine, cosine, cosecant, and secant are all the same. But I just had to stop there because I wanted you guys to see that idea, how important that idea was. Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that makes sense? Okay. Let's move on to reading. By the way, guys, just real quick, if anybody's interested, I've been posting these individual video sections, but if anybody's interested in seeing these videos in particular, these 74F videos done. If anybody's interested, there's the 74F real-time video playlist. So that goes through each section of the test in real time. And then I mentioned the BO4 videos as well. Post those. Hey, Sarah, can you do me a favor? Sarah, can you go into the playlist section on the channel, in the studio channel, and click playlist? And then can you just copy and paste any of the playlists just in the comments section, not in the chat, just so everybody has this going forward. Any of them that I think there's like 6 or 7 of the full tests that we've done, BO4, A11, 74F. Can you post those in the comments section below this video for the real, and just say like what I just did there in the chat, and say like this is the test form real-time video playlist, whatever the test form is. I think we've done like 7, but just so everybody has access. And maybe if you can individually comment like 7 times with each of those so that students don't get confused with the wording. That would be great, Sarah, if you can do that. If you have any trouble finding them, let me know. But even if you click on those links, I think you should be able to find them. All right, guys, so let's keep going. All right, so talking about the reading section now. This is the one section, I think, that from a strategy standpoint, I feel very strongly about using one strategy, but I will say that I think it's the one we've seen the most fluctuation on. Now, in terms of the idea of being accurate, that can't get lost. But if you prefer to skim the passage and you've practiced that and you've done well using that method, then continue to do it. But if you're searching for a method for the reading section, a strategy, I highly, highly recommend reading the entire passage, reading passage thoroughly, reading passage thoroughly, and trusting your reading. Reading passage thoroughly for every passage and trusting your reading. So this is how we do it. With our students, we say take an untimed test, first and foremost, untimed reading test, so that you're not worried about time. Okay? I'm glad, guys. If you have any the nice comments about it, that these videos are helping you guys are great. I really appreciate it. Just makes us want to do more of these videos. Like I said, if anybody has the means or is interested, any of the subscriptions that you guys purchase from us, or if you join for the $3 a month, I know that's not for everybody, and I don't want to continue to promote these, but it will allow us to continue to make more of these videos. We could do daily videos if we get to a certain number of subscribers. So at this point, if you guys haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. Help us spread the word. Help us tell your friends. It's just a nice time to bring it out. Yeah, thanks, Anonymous. Thank you for the nice comment. I appreciate it. And yeah, like I said, if you guys can join this, even the silver membership at $3 a month, I think it will really help us as we continue to move forward if we get enough students. So don't do it if you can't, but of course if you feel like it, then please join the channel. And you do get perks, by the way, guys. If you join the silver membership, all of your questions in the comments section, we see who's a silver member. Instead of any of our teachers answering those questions, I specifically answer any of the questions from silver members. So if you are interested in the $3 a month, I'll be the one answering your questions. I'll answer other questions in the comments sometimes too, but it's not guaranteed. I make sure that I answer those questions. So there is a perk if if, anything else. Yeah, anonymous. Yeah, so our videos are growing, but you're right. I mean, it's all about the algorithm. Okay, Chase. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm gonna say thank you. Maybe I don't know who either of them are. Um, or no thank you. But anyway, yeah, anonymous. I really appreciate it. So guys, again, as you guys go through this test, these videos are going to keep coming up more and more. We're going to keep making these videos, but I just encourage you. In any case, guys, an untimed reading test here. Okay, I recommend an untimed reading test. Thanks, Jace. I appreciate it. Okay, untimed reading, and here's why. If you take an untimed reading test and you truly take it, then even if it takes you 70 minutes, right? Even if it takes you 70 minutes to do this, you should get through all the questions and get them all right. We always get students who miss questions, and I'm like, how long did it take you? They say 45 minutes. The test is 35 minutes, so it's not really untimed, right? It's like you got to sit there without, right? You got to sit there and know an untimed test is truly untimed. And then this is how I would do it. So this is actually a great time to. AR just asked, how do you understand the first passage? Here's how I would do it: is identify which of your passages is your weakest passage, which one you like to read the least, and do that one last. Because at the very worst, if you're starting to run low on time, at least you're guessing on the passage that you don't like to do that you like to do the least. Right? Does that make sense? So the one you like to do the least is the one you should do last always, because if you end up having to guess, you're not sacrificing other questions on easier passages for you just because, right? That's that whole objective mentality and really thinking through this in a more mathematical way. So again, untimed reading test and see which questions, which passage with no timing being a factor are the ones that you struggle with the most. So that's untimed reading. You figure out which passage, you really read through the passages thoroughly, and then when you get to the questions, we like to do a drill where we say trust your reading. Okay, it's a drill that I like to do with students. It's a drill that I used to do. Trust your reading. What that means is see if you can identify which is the answer choice without going back to the passage. Okay, most of the time, okay, I don't know. Sean, I don't know if I am getting the right answers, but I've practiced enough to know that if I know that an answer choice doesn't reflect the tone or the main idea, those are two things I'm always looking out for while I'm reading. What's the main idea? Who are they generally talking about? Or what are they generally talking about? I ask myself that question. If it's a fiction passage, who's the main character? What's the relationship between the main character? If it's a science passage, what is the main topic of that science, right? And then what's the tone? How does the author generally feel about that topic? And if the tone is positive and you see an answer choice with a negative tone word in it, even if every other part about the answer choice is correct, I guarantee it's the wrong answer. And that's the one that's so hard to get away from, is we see students all the time that answer a question like, did I answer all these? Maybe I did. Right, the narrative passage can best be described as a swimmer. This is a positive passage. Like I said, we've seen this before. Okay, but recalls the swim of his life. It's positive. So swim of his life would make sense. Remembers the events that inspired. That's a good one. Contrast, right? Right away, guys. Does everybody see this? If you read through passage number 1 on the 74F test, this is a positive tone. Okay, chronicles swim. So contrast right away the joy of winning competitions. Contrast means that there's a positive and negative aspect to it, right? That's what contrast means. You're comparing two things. Typically, that's what it means. I'm 95% sure right off the bat that C is not the right answer. Okay? I'm 95% sure. So does that make sense? If I'm looking out for the tone and I'm trusting my reading, can everybody give me a thumbs up that those are the things you need to be looking out for? And it's amazing to me that when we do this drill with students, how often students realize that they can trust their reading. Okay? Okay, so Jace, what I would say is start by taking an untimed test. If you struggle to comprehend, then you might have to look at that skimming method, right? And I don't teach that as well. I just don't know it as well because I didn't use that when I was a kid. I love to read, so I understand that there's some different methods you can use. But Jace, what I would recommend is if you take 70 minutes to read the passages, okay, but you only get and you get all 40 questions right, but it takes you 70 minutes. Then really you should be looking at a goal of maybe getting 23 or 24 questions right and then guessing the remaining 16 questions. Because if you get 23 out of 40 and you guess on the last 16, you're really looking at like 28 out of 40. And that's that's somewhere in like the 25, 27, 28 range. It's so much more consistent than skimming. It just is so much more consistent. Now, can you skim? Have we seen students be successful with skimming? Absolutely. but it's way more volatile. That's where you can get like a 31 and then a 26, and you have no idea why. And the reason is because when you skim, there's a lot more factors that can go wrong. If you come across a hard question but you've read the passage, generally the hard question you know between two answers and you're just taking a 50-50 guess on the hardest questions. If you skim, you may have no idea what they're even talking about with that question because you didn't read the passage. Does that make sense, guys? So that's why more than anything, I recommend reading every passage thoroughly to the point that you you see how long these passages are taking you. Yeah, I agree, Shafat. I think that skimming ends up being more time consuming in the long run, and I think it ends up being way more inconsistent. But we have had students that use that method well. Okay, so I would just say if you're going to practice and you're still looking for one of the methods, right, try the reading the passage untimed first. And to Jace, to your question, see how long it takes you. If it takes you 12 minutes, right, to read each passage, then you're probably looking at about getting 28 out of 40 questions right, when you start having to guess on the last 12. But 28 out of 40 with a guessing letter is probably plus 4. You end up getting 32 out of 40 if you've been accurate on those 28. Inference questions, Varun. So it's a good question because inference questions are those exact questions I'm talking about, where if you skim, those inference questions are really, really difficult. If you've read the passage, then I would really look out for tone words in terms of inference questions. Okay, so for example, let's see if we have one here. Yeah, so when the narrator heard the words jump, no, that's not it. Yes, speculates, right? Number 8. If you guys are looking on 74F, number 8 is kind of an inference question. This is a very easy question to eliminate down to, like, the cheering boy happens, right? And then you see that the tone, like I said, is positive. So look at this. Just knowing that the tone is positive and that there was a cheering boy in the stands, right, for this guy that's swimming the swim trial, I know that the word criticizes is negative, so I can immediately eliminate answer choice F. Even though the cheering boy is mentioned and the narrator's efforts are mentioned, criticizes means that it's immediately off because it's a positive passage. Cheering boy as he shouts encouragement to the narrator, maybe. Narrator as he angrily, right, this said angrily before. So to the inference question that Varun just asked, angrily gets crossed off, and then J is, right, at least if you read the passage, and you don't have to go back. I haven't read this passage in 2 years probably, right? I haven't read it thoroughly in 2 years, but I still remember that it's positive. And by doing that, and I remember the cheering boy, I can eliminate down to at least G and H, and then I infer that the answer was H based on going back to the passage. If you need to, you can go back to these lines. But don't immediately go back to the lines without looking and identifying are there any questions that we can eliminate without having to go back. Does that all make sense? And again, this is number 8. If you guys are if you want to try a passage, try 74F passage number 1. And 8 is a great example of how inconsistent that skimming method can be. Yeah, Shafat, if you can just spread the word more than anything, guys. I totally understand if you don't have the means. I totally understand to join the membership program or whatever. But just help us spread the word because the more viewers we get, this isn't an entertainment channel. This is not we're not trying to be. We're not trying to do those, right? But if you can help us spread the word, guys, if we get to a certain number of viewers, then the membership stuff doesn't really matter. So that's the most important thing. If you guys can help us continue to spread the word. Yeah, when looking back, so the thing I would say about it is, yeah, exactly. Sharing Star U and sharing the channel, guys, as much as you can will really help because that alone, the number of views will help tremendously. So one of the things that I would say is Jace, if you are gonna go by our method of reading the passage thoroughly, try to map it out as you go, right? The whole thing is about this kid swimming, right? And it's kind of talking about different aspects of this swimming life of his. So try to map it out, like what's going on in this paragraph. Okay, so that when you do go back, you generally remember where to look back to, and then you just reread like 5 or 6 lines. So this is a good example, like 35. They give you the line numbers here, lines 35 and 36. you probably want to go back and read maybe lines 32 through 40 just to make sure, that's 8 lines, just to make sure you understand what's going on there again. And then you can, then it's pretty easy to answer choice H. So my recommendation in terms of preparing is to try to eliminate down before ever going back, seeing if you can get to the 2 answer choices that you're supposed to eliminate to, especially on the inference. Varun, did that help, by the way, on the inference? I didn't even ask you. Hopefully that helped. And then you can go back, because now you're just comparing 2 answers, and they're very specific. G and H are very specific. So by rereading, you know you're going to get to the right answer. Yeah, having an idea, and exactly right. So having an idea of the tone and the main idea is so important. Okay, because again, it just makes it so much more consistent. You can get by with the skimming method, but we have seen students use it, and one day they're at a 32, and the next day they're at a 25, and that is a big confidence killer, right? If suddenly you drop and you have no idea why. No more live streams, guys. Before the test on Saturday, there won't be any more live streams, but this video will be fully recorded and posted to the channel immediately when we're done. So you guys can rewatch or watch this again if you need to. All right, guys, so we are kind of running low on time here, and like I said, I have to get out of here pretty close to the top of the hour. So let's talk about the science section. Is that cool? Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that works out? Let's talk about science. And we're not going to have too much time to discuss this because you guys have asked such great questions. However, with the science section, we have a 15-minute video that can be extremely, extremely helpful, which is what we would have talked about today anyway. And it discusses what we call our Science 3 pass method. So it's just the exact same thing as the math section that we talked about in terms of 3 pass, but this helps you identify ACT, Maya, I think it is, Maya, M-A-I-A. Hopefully that's how you pronounce it, but Maya, that's great. I think that's awesome. If you're binge watching the videos, they can only help. I really believe that. ACT Science 3 pass. So whatever we don't get to today, guys, can be found here in terms of identifying questions. So I highly recommend watching that. That's probably of the videos that we've posted so far in a short amount of time. That's only a 15-minute video. If you guys are going to watch any of the videos I've posted or that Sarah's posting those playlists, I'd highly recommend posting or watching that one, mainly because it is 15 minutes, but it can be so helpful in the science section. So on science, we have the same idea here. We have 3 pass method. Okay, 3 pass method. But the way to approach this is a little bit different. You're not doing the 5 questions this time on science. On the first pass, you're just looking for a specific question type. So any questions that correspond to this, and like I said, it's easier to be found in that video that I just posted. But any questions that begin with the words or contain, sometimes they don't begin with these words, but they're longer and you can find them within the question. According to or based on, okay, according to or based on, if you see those words in the question, and usually it is at the beginning, or you see a question with it's a short question, right, or short answer choices, short answers, answer choices, those are all first pass questions, because if it's short answer choices, typically it's a number, and they're just going to ask you to identify a number. Okay, does that all make sense? Can everybody give me a thumbs up if those first pass type of questions make sense? So it says according to, based on, or it has numbers, and I'll show you. And if it has a combination of those, obviously you got to do that question because it's super easy. Okay, and we want to do these ones out of order as well. It's a hard process. It's not something that's immediate. You have to practice this. But if you practice and you get good at this, objectively speaking, your score will go up. You are maximizing the probability of getting as many questions as you can correctly at every level of the test. Okay, that's a mathematical fact and certainty that is not arguable. You can't argue against the numbers, right? You can't argue numbers. Those are rules based. You can't argue numbers. So this is factually. Now, does it take a second to learn this strategy and to apply it? Absolutely. I can agree with you on that forever. But if you do it and you learn how to do it, and you've seen this in every video we've ever posted, okay, then that's extremely, you will get better, and you will improve overnight because it takes all the anxiety away. As an example, this first thing says, a study was conducted to examine whether female Blatella germanica prefer to eat cat food, cheese, ham, or peanuts. Guys, do you think I have any idea what they're talking about here? None. I have no idea how this relates to anything. I have no knowledge of this at all. Does that mean that I can't answer 25? On the first pass of the science questions, there are probably, let's call it 20 questions that deal with these first pass, where you have to have no outside knowledge, zero, none, zip, in order to answer at least 20 questions correctly, and they can all be really quick, right? On this one, number one is a combination of this according to question, and it's a short question, and it has short answer choices. Don't read the blurb first. On the second pass, you can go back and reread the blurbs, right, and answer some of those science-based questions, but you do not need to read the blurbs at all on these first 20 questions, because watch what it says. According to figure 1, right, we're circling the most important parts of the question. The mass of cheese, we got to circle cheese, at 4 hours was closest to which of the following? So we're going to go find figure 1. It literally points us. Figure 1, cheese, okay, 4 hours. And we're looking for this mark, right? So it's at what, like 185? I mean, how quick could we answer that question? Did I need to know anything about anything to answer that? No, you could have replaced that graph and those axes, right, with completely different words, but the question, the foundation of that question would not have changed. Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that makes sense? It is so critical, right? In this second one, number 2 is a good question to go over because number 2 says, it starts with the word suppose, but if we look a little bit further, we see based on, and we see short answer choices again. So this is also probably an easy question. Based on figure 1, the 4 foods should the company place in the trap to maximize the chance of capturing these. So according to figure 1, we might have to understand a little bit about this. It says the mass of food remaining on the y-axis. Okay, that means that they must be eating it after this amount of time. They're eating these foods. So we actually want to look for the shortest one here, not the tallest one. But almost immediately, we know on a question like this, right, to maximize or to minimize, does everybody see that we can probably eliminate answer choices G and H? Because G and H here, right, these two, ham and cheese, they're not maximums or minimums. And if you eliminate those two, now you can really understand what's going on here. And we look at peanuts because clearly they like to eat the peanuts the most because that's the one that's going down the most. Yeah, exactly, right? Pay attention to the variables. That's exactly right. If you are following along with the question, and you're saying figure 1, and just like, right, as you're looking at this and you understand, right, what the figures and the graphs are talking about, it's so hard to miss these questions, right? Look at number 3. Consider the 4 foods from food to food, and the only reason I'm answering this one is because anytime you see just increased only or decreased only, that's a relatively short answer choice, right? Short answer choices. This is probably not going to be that hard of a question. Says from food to food as the percent by mass proteins increase, so percent by mass proteins, the mass of food remaining did what? Okay, so 4 foods, the mass, percent by mass increased, so this one was going up, right? This one's going up, this one looks like it's going up for all of them. The other one did what? Decreased only, I think. It didn't. The percent by mass of protein. Sorry, I circled proteins. I'm an idiot. Right, as the proteins went up, right, what happened here? Well, it looks like as we go to cat food to peanuts and these go up, these all go down. Percent by mass, so this one would be decreased only. Right, those ones are not that hard. We have 50 seconds, around 50 seconds per question. That didn't take us 50 seconds. It took us longer than the first one, but the first one took us like 10 seconds. And then we added 40 seconds to our overall time so that if you do the pass 1 correctly, right, then you go back on pass 2 on some of those harder questions with your goal number in mind. Let's say you get 20 out of 40 done with 100% accuracy, that there are 20 questions on this test that look just like the 3 we just did. Now you go back. Let's say your goal was to get 30 out of 40 because that corresponded to your goal score. Now you probably have 20 minutes, right? Around 20 minutes for 10 questions. And you're now looking at those 10 and you're making sure that you're accurate, skipping the other 10, and then guessing the same letter down on the 10 that you don't get to that are exceptionally hard. On the science-based knowledge questions, the best thing that you can do is to really pay attention and to focus on those and realize that you do have more time and that you should take more time because you've already done the 20 easier questions. And it's okay to take time when you get to pass number 2, and then you're just using the guessing technique for pass number 3. Does that all make sense, guys? Can everybody give me a thumbs up if that makes sense? Thumbs up, guys, if that makes sense. Okay, great, guys. That's perfect. I'm seeing these comments come through. That's awesome. All right, guys. So like I said, I do have to run, unfortunately. I know that kind of stinks because I wanted to get through more of the science stuff. But having said that, the great news is that as we've developed more of this content, as we've developed more of this ACT content and all these videos, we do have a lot of these videos already pre-recorded, but it's broken up into sections. So my biggest advice is that if you haven't saved that video link that I posted with the ACT Science 3 pass method, it's just a little bit above this in the chat. But save that link and make sure that you watch that 3 pass method. And it just breaks it down. It's everything that we just talked about. It just breaks it down even a little bit further. But it's not that hard to understand, right? On the first pass, we're looking for a specific question type. And on the next pass, we're trying to find the 10 or whatever the number is that we're trying to answer total. We're trying to find that many questions with the time remaining. With about 1 minute to go, we move on to our guessing letter and we find the one that we've used the least, and then we go from there. And that's about it, guys. That's all you really have to worry about. And then if you do this if you do this according to plan and you get 30 out of 40 on most tests, that's not the case on this one. But on this one, there's actually more than 20 out of 40, so there's actually easier questions. Typically, 30 out of 40 plus the guessing letter will net you around 33 out of 40. Which on most recent science tests is a 30 on the science section. On this one, it is not, but there are also easier questions. There's more than 20 easy questions on this test, so that's why the score and the scale are a little bit harder. Yep, exactly. You use the choices from your previous answers, right? You look at your bubble sheet. It becomes way more clear. That math video that I posted earlier, the quick way to quickly increase your score on math, we actually bubble in the answers on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. And then I count them up so that I can be really sure. And it worked. I got like 7 additional questions, right? I answered like 35 out of 60 on the math test and stopped. And then found the letter choice that had been used the least. And I think I got 42 out of 60, which was a 27. And I promise you this stuff works. It's objective. It's mathematical. It's so important that if you realize the formatting of these tests and you do these little things in your practice, is it a little bit different way to take a test? Absolutely. Is it mathematically, objectively going to raise your score? 100%. I guarantee it. Because it's not just based on some strategy that might apply to one student, not the other. This is a strategy at every level of the test that is going to work. Or it's an understanding, I should say. It's not much of a strategy. There are strategy moments, but yeah. Just find your goal number of questions that you want to answer per question. Write that goal number of questions down. And then that's the number you're thinking about, not the score. If it's math, I'm thinking, how do I find 45 questions that I know how to answer? And then what ends up happening is if you practice this enough, you don't really think about it as a 3-pass method. You just kind of do it. You just look for the easy questions and you know what your number is and you get close to that number. You might even tally up 45 questions. I don't think that's the worst idea in the world. It doesn't take that long to make one little mark on your sheet, right? Everybody's like, well, why would I be tallying? That takes away time. It's like 1, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, right? It takes 45 seconds on the whole test out of 60 minutes. And I don't think it's the worst idea in the world because it keeps you task-oriented. It tells you exactly where you are on the test. So you're thinking about that number instead of thinking about the timing as it starts to wind down. All right, guys, so hopefully that was helpful. If you guys can give us one more thumbs up. Obviously, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. Please help us spread the word. Please download Star U. It's free. The downloading Star U part is more objective than anything. Same with subscribing because those are free. There are a lot of great resources both in the app, in Star U, and on this channel, and a lot of this stuff is free. We're trying to spread the word about the channel. We want your help. We want you guys to help us, get to a point where we can make daily videos and do this full time. So if nothing else, if you can't join the membership program, if you're not going to do the Smart Bubble Sheet, that's totally fine. At least help us spread the word about subscribing, and obviously subscribe yourself if you haven't. All right, guys, so I'm out of breath. I'm going to go take a break for a second. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week preparing. If you're taking the test on Saturday or Sunday, good luck. Varun, yeah. So Varun, just go to that 3-pass method video. I know that that's that's not the best way to do that to say, but Varun, check out that 3-pass method video because we talk about that in a lot more detail, like the hardest science question types, the knowledge-based ones, right? Hopefully you have enough time from the easy questions that you have time to actually go back and read what's going on with these experiments, and that will help you with those knowledge-based questions. It's much more about timing than it is about general knowledge of science. All right, guys, final thing is if you do have any further comments or questions, if you rewatch this video and you have comments or questions, just comment below this video and one of us will answer those questions. One of our teachers or tutors will answer those questions. So, yeah, if you're rewatching and you didn't get a question answered or you come up with another question, just post that comment or question below these videos or on any of the real-time videos that you guys watch. And we will, we'll continue to continue to help you guys as much as we can. And good luck on the test if you're taking it this week. And then we'll have more real-time videos coming out over the course of the next few months. All right, thanks, Sarah, guys. She's been awesome. She's, again, a great resource. She's another one of our teachers and tutors that will respond in the comments section. Like I said, she got a perfect score on this test not that long ago and really, really adopted a lot of these things that we've been using, and I promise, and she can tell you that these things work. They're objective and they'll work. So thank you, Sarah, for jumping on. And, guys, I hope you guys, again, have a great rest of your day, have a great night or day wherever you are in the world. Have a great rest of your week, and good luck on the test, guys. Talk to you soon. We'll see you in the next live stream.